Imagine a cold so deep, so biting, that it doesn't just, sit on the surface of your skin.
Oh, yeah.
It totally bypasses your jacket, it bypasses your muscles, and it basically introduces itself directly to your bones.
It's that visceral, physically painful kind of cold.
Exactly. And the author of the essay we are exploring today, he describes this specific chill in Montana's East Fork as this firm, quote, ancestral handshake.
I love that phrase so much.
Right. It's the exact kind of freezing morning that makes a simple cup of black coffee poured into a dented metal camp cup feel less like a beverage and more like a profound religious experience.
It really does. Because it immediately grounds you in the physical reality of the place.
Yeah.
You aren't just looking at a pretty postcard of a mountain. You are actually shivering out there in the dark.
Oh, absolutely.
And that physical grounding is vital, because this isn't just some memoir about a gorgeous landscape. It's a real dissection of what happens when a culture built on harsh physical realities collides with modern comfort.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission here for you today is to explore the intersection of history, memory, and modernization in a rapidly changing American landscape.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Through the lens of this essay, which is titled The Bone-Deep Heritage of the Bitterroot Valley, we are looking at the weight of legacy. We're looking at the friction between old values and new money and the human search for peace.
Right.
And ultimately, we want to discover what it truly means to belong to a place.
And the beauty of focusing on the Bitterroot Valley is that the themes playing out in these small Montana towns, I mean, things like gentrification, shifting demographics, the loss of communal memory, they're entirely universal.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
The mechanics of how a community changes when new wealth moves in are exactly the same, whether you're in Darby, Montana, or, a historic neighborhood in Brooklyn.
That is such a good point. So the text establishes this intense physical connection to the land right away. The essay transports us back to the 1970s and 80s.
Right, sitting around the fire.
Yeah, sitting by a campfire with his Uncle Dale and a man named John Zito. He describes the orange firelight flickering against this dark, impenetrable wall of lodgepole pines, just listening to the mountain breathe.
It's incredibly atmospheric.
Back then, the Bitterroot Valley wasn't marketed as a destination. It was just home.
And he emphasizes that it was a home defined by labor, not leisure. That's a huge distinction.
Oh, totally.
He writes that the dirt under your fingernails was literally a diary of your week's work. This wasn't a passive, aesthetic relationship with the environment.
Right, they weren't just hiking for fun.
Exactly. He mentions his family has been rooted in this specific soil for 6 generations. But he doesn't describe that timeline as a genealogy or some family tree on a piece of paper. He actually calls it a long, slow conversation with the land itself.
Which is a conversation that involves an immense amount of history. Like when they would head up toward the southern outpost of Sula, they were stepping into a timeline that goes way, way back.
Oh, absolutely.
Sula was named in 1889 after Ursula Thompson, who was this incredibly tough frontier woman. And it became this gateway for ranchers pushing cattle into the high pastures.
And the history goes back even further than that.
Yeah, long before Ursula, the author notes that Lewis and Clark passed through these exact same corridors in 1805.
Right.
They were probably shivering in that exact same cold, guided by the Salish people toward the Lolo Pass.
And when you look closely at those different eras, you see entirely different mechanisms of interacting with the valley.
How so?
Well, the Salish guides understood the rhythms of the landscape. They moved with the seasons. Then Lewis and Clark experienced the bitter cold and the terrain as this massive, punishing obstacle to survive.
Yeah, just trying to get through it.
Right. And then Ursula Thompson and the early homesteaders, they treated the land as an adversary to be tamed, carving out ranches from the wilderness. So the author realizes he isn't just walking through the woods. He is walking through the layered ghosts of all those different relationships with the soil.
It makes me think of the Bitterroot Valley as this massive geological core sample of human history.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You know when scientists drill down into the ice or the earth and they pull up that long cylinder and every distinct layer tells a story about a different climate era?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you walk through this valley, you are stepping through that cultural core sample. You've got the Salish guides at the foundation, the Lewis and Clark expedition on top of that, Ursula Thompson and the homesteaders laid next, right up to Uncle Dale by the campfire in the 70s.
That core sample analogy works perfectly because those layers are compressed together by the sheer weight of the environment.
Yeah.
The text mentions the hard-eyed men who realized that if you could survive a Sula winter, you could survive absolutely anything.
But I do want to push back gently on the author's framing here, just for a second.
Okay, sure.
When we look back at our childhoods or we tell stories about our rugged ancestors, memory has a really funny way of filtering out the bad stuff.
Of course.
We tend to romanticize the struggle. Is it possible the author is looking at this history through, a sepia-toned, nostalgic lens?
What's fascinating here is that the author deliberately avoids painting this as a purely romantic paradise. He actually grounds the history entirely in hardship.
Okay, so he acknowledges the grit.
Yes, he doesn't shy away from the brutal reality of what it took to survive there. He details the sheer physical stubbornness required by his ancestors to clear fields of glacial rock entirely by hand.
Wow, completely by hand.
Entirely. He talks about digging miles of irrigation ditches with basic tools just to get water to the crops. This wasn't an easy, idyllic life.
Right.
The legacy he feels a connection to is built almost entirely on grit, muscle aches, and borderline irrational persistence.
And that kind of generational stubbornness doesn't just stay in the fields. It completely bleeds over into their daily lives and their rituals, especially in how they interacted with the wildlife.
Right. The sheer persistence required to cart out a farming life in that valley translated directly into their hunting culture, which, as the author vividly details, was frequently an exercise in pure frustration.
Pure comedy, honestly. He talks about spending his youth dragging a rifle through the East Fork brush with a, quote, heart full of optimism and a freezer that remains stubbornly empty.
Yes.
Apparently, back in the 70s and 80s, the deer and elk seasons overlapped. He compares those overlapping seasons to the overlapping stories told around the wood stove. But the East Fork itself seemed to have a malicious sense of humor.
Because he was constantly encountering bighorn rams.
Yes.
Rams for which he absolutely did not have a hunting permit.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He says that every time he'd catch a flash of tawny hide through the timber, his heart would start thumping, he'd bring the scope up to his eye, and he would find himself staring directly into the weird rectangular pupil of a mountain sheep.
Just looking right back at him.
Yeah, looking back at him with bored dignity. He figures he drew his rifle hundreds of times over those years, and every single time, it was a sheep. It's like the East Fork was this exclusive VIP club where the mountain sheep held the demographic majority, and the hunters were just there to provide free entertainment.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And the text gives this brilliant, almost slapstick example of what happens when that endless string of frustration finally breaks.
Oh man, the missed shot.
Yes. He describes a moment where an actual legal elk makes a massive lapse in judgment and leaps out right in front of their Jeep.
Standing broadside at 20 yards, completely oblivious.
Exactly. So he scrambles for his rifle, his pulse is drumming in his ears, gets the shoulder and the crosshairs completely dialed in.
The moment of truth.
And just as he is about to squeeze the trigger, someone in his hunting party, who he diplomatically refuses to name, bellows at the top of their lungs.
Don't shoot it in the butt.
Yes, which is the absolute last thing you want yelled in your ear during high-stakes focus.
Right. He talks about going through a half second of intense mental gymnastics, trying to calculate the trajectory of a butt shot versus a clean kill.
Right.
And in that tiny window of hesitation, the elk realizes it has an appointment elsewhere and just vanishes into the timber, leaving the author standing there with his rifle raised, pointing at an empty patch of huckleberry brush.
It is a brilliantly comedic moment, but it serves a much deeper narrative purpose.
How so?
Well, he notes that down by the river in the valley, the deer were so thick he practically had to shoo them off the porch. But up in the East Fork, it was a kingdom of sheep and the one that got away. And this brings us to a profound realization about the mechanics of their community.
Okay.
He writes that those hunting camps, smelling of wood smoke and damp wool, were cathedrals.
Calling a damp hunting camp a cathedral, that's a really heavy word choice.
It is, and he uses it deliberately. Because in those spaces, the stories of the missed shots, the laughter, the shared experience of failure and persistence, those were ultimately far more valuable than the actual harvest.
Ah, I see.
The shared ritual of trying and failing bonded the community together much tighter than a successful hunt ever could. The stories mattered more than the meat in the freezer.
That cathedral mindset, valuing the shared struggle over the prize, it's incredibly fragile. And we're seeing exactly what happens when a culture built on patience and shared failure collides with a modern economy built on instant gratification.
Very much so.
Which brings us to the massive shift in the valley and the central conflict of the essay today.
In the old days, the author points out there's a completely unwritten value system governing the valley. He calls it a hand-up culture.
He explains that if a neighbor's tractor broke down, you didn't send them a text to say, sorry to hear that. You just showed up in their driveway with a wrench.
And we need to look at the mechanism behind that behavior. That hand-up culture wasn't just a quaint moral choice. It was an evolutionary survival mechanism for these rural towns.
Because the stakes were so high.
Exactly. When you are living in a valley that gets snowed in at 30 below zero, a broken tractor or collapsed roof isn't an inconvenience. It is an existential threat. Mutual reliance was quite literally the only way the town functioned.
Wow.
It fostered a deep, humbling respect for the fact that you were never the biggest thing in the woods.
But today, that vulnerability is being paved over. The valley is experiencing a massive influx of people arriving from urban centers and suburban sprawls.
Yeah.
They are rolling in with shiny, expensive rigs and top-of-the-line gear, and they're all looking for what the real estate brochures call the last best place.
And the socioeconomic mechanics of the town are altering in real time to accommodate this new demographic.
He sees this stark contrast when he's just running errands. He observes the changes in the grocery store in Hamilton or when grabbing a cup of coffee in Darby.
Right.
The quiet humility of the old valley is getting drowned out by the noise of lifestyle and amenities. He has the striking line where he says the grit of the valley is being replaced by grace notes that feel completely foreign to the soil.
You are seeing a shift from a producer relationship with the environment to a consumer relationship.
Tell me more about that.
The original locals interacted with the land by producing from it, clearing the rocks, digging the ditches, enduring the hunting seasons. The influx of new wealth is primarily interested in consuming the aesthetic of the land.
Ah,
They are
yeah.
buying the mountain view and the rustic vibe, which is why the town's infrastructure shifts from hardware stores and feed shops to artisanal coffee and high-end outdoor boutiques.
But I have to ask the tough question here.
Go for it.
Is this just the classic get off my lawn mentality? Like, are the locals just being fiercely defensive and insisting that the newcomers are ruining the valley simply because they bring fancy coffee and shiny trucks?
Well, we aren't taking a side on the politics of gentrification here, and the author handles this tension with a lot of nuance, too.
Okay.
He explicitly states, I don't think the newcomers are destroying the Bitterroot. He doesn't view them as villains in this story. When he sees these folks in town, he actually feels a strange mix of protectionism and pity.
Pity. That's a surprising reaction to someone driving a $90,000 truck.
It is, but he recognizes that these people are desperately hungry for the exact same peace that the locals have always enjoyed. The deep irony is that they bring the frantic, demanding pace of the cities they just fled right along with them.
Oh, that makes sense.
They trying to purchase serenity as an amenity. They aren't trying to ruin anything. They just, as he puts it, haven't yet learned how to sit still long enough to hear what the land is saying.
So if the newcomers aren't the enemy, but the valley is permanently changing and filling up with traffic, he mentions the Highway 93 traffic alone makes him grit his teeth.
Yes, that detail really stands out.
How does he reconcile this? How do you keep the heritage alive when the physical landscape is being transformed by wealth?
He reconciles it by fundamentally redefining what it means to be a local. He shifts the definition away from geography or property rights and argues that belonging is entirely about philosophy and action.
He writes that being a local isn't about how long your GPS has been set to a Montana address.
Exactly. In sociology, there's a concept known as place attachment theory. It's the idea that the psychological bond between a person and a place isn't formed by a financial transaction, like buying a house, but by shared experiences, memories, and active stewardship over time.
I love that.
The author is tapping directly into this theory. He wants to invite these newcomers into the older lineage. He says the most important thing you can carry into the East Fork isn't a top-of-the-line spotting scope that you bought for $3,000. The most important thing you can carry is a sense of stewardship.
So what does this all mean? If I can throw an analogy out there, it feels like the concept of being local in this valley is essentially an operating system.
Okay, I'm tracking.
You have to download it directly from the environment over a long period of time. These newcomers are showing up and they are buying all the absolute best hardware, the shiny rigs, the expensive spotting scopes at prime real estate.
Right.
But without the software, the stewardship, the patience, the willingness to show up in a neighbor's driveway with a wrench, the system just doesn't work. The expensive hardware is completely useless without the right operating system to run it.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The gear and the address don't grant you access to the heritage. The mindset does.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this leads to his ultimate realization.
Which is?
He says that when he stands out there, looking at the ridges where Lewis and Clark struggled, and he thinks about his grandfather's hands clearing those rocks, he realizes that the legacy isn't the land itself. The legacy isn't the dirt.
It's the actions performed on the dirt.
Precisely. The legacy is the way we treat the environment and the way we treat each other, the honesty, the slow-cooked conversations around a campfire, the evolutionary reliance of the hand-up culture.
Yeah.
Those values don't magically disappear just because a coffee shop opens in Darby or traffic increases on Highway 93.
They're just waiting to be claimed by anyone willing to adopt that operating system. And I love the image he leaves us with to anchor this feeling.
It's a great visual.
He says whenever he goes back, he drives toward Sula and looks up at the rocky outcroppings, and he sees the mountain sheep. He's absolutely convinced they are the direct descendants of the ones that laughed at him through his rifle scope back in 1982.
Staring down with that exact same bored dignity.
Yes, and those sheep, they aren't worried about the traffic on Highway 93. They aren't worried about the shiny rigs or the shifting demographics of the local grocery store. They know that the mountains have a way of outlasting human trends.
The mountain sheep provide a tremendous sense of scale. They remind the author and us that human anxieties about gentrification and modernization are just a tiny blip on the geological timeline of the valley. The mountains will endure, and the values that align with the mountains will endure if people choose to carry them.
So, to bring this all together for you listening, we've journeyed from that biting, cold, ancestral handshake of the East Fork, through the hilarious frustrations of missing a broadside elk in the huckleberry brush, all the way to the complex socioeconomic realities of modern-day Darby and Hamilton.
We really have covered a lot of ground.
We've looked at how a place changes and how the definition of belonging has to evolve from just holding a property deed to holding a deep, active sense of stewardship.
And we spent a lot of time today discussing the mechanisms that forged this culture.
Yeah.
We talked about how the hand-up culture of showing up with a wrench wasn't just neighborly. It was born out of extreme physical vulnerability.
Right.
Surviving the cold, the isolation, the crop failures, that shared physical struggle forced people to rely on each other entirely.
It created a bond that simply couldn't exist without the harshness of the environment forcing it into existence.
Which leaves us with a fascinating question for our own lives.
Huh?
And I want to point back to a specific line from the text. The author mentions the old rural value of having a willingness to be unsuccessful in a hunt and still call it a perfect day.
I love that line.
Today, we are increasingly insulated from that kind of physical vulnerability. We have on-demand services, climate-controlled homes, and digital networks that connect us instantly across the globe. We are obsessed with the harvest, with productivity and tangible results.
Yeah, everything is about what we got done today.
Exactly. So here's the thought to mull over. In our modern lives, no matter where we live, what is your equivalent of sitting in the woods, completely missing the goal, but still having the quiet humility to call the day an absolute success?
Wow, that is an incredible thought to walk away with. Can you have the software of a community without the harsh reality of the hardware? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Bitterroot Valley. Take a cue from the essay today, put down your phone, pick up a piece of firewood, and take a moment to appreciate the unseen layers of history right beneath your feet. Stay curious.